Yeah, when we, oops.
Sorry, everyone. I had to make a coffee and I was running late.
Mhm.
One of those days. So I apologize. Anyway, hello.
So Tess and I were talking about, we have tickets to see the Messiah by candlelight on that Tuesday of the week. So I'm excited about that. And I'm also invited Alexander Martine. So there'll be three of us, hopefully.
The boys aren't jealous.
The
Are we
girls
boys?
gotta get together.
The Academy. I just think about how KUSC and now LA always talks about the Academy of St. Martin's in the Fields. Whenever they talk about one of their albums.
Yeah, it's a wonderful place for concerts. I try to get there at least once a visit for something. If I can coincide with it. This looked good. There's some other things I wanted to see more, but this looked fine. So, good morning, everybody.
So I'm just, since most of us, sorry, Ashkant, I hope you can in the future, but since most of us here are going, this is an email I'll be sending out, so I might as well ask you now. Deanie and I need to know your availability for these other things. So everyone's who is going to be around is coming for the dinner the night before, right? Cool. And then we're thinking dinner maybe at the Groucho Club, but maybe just use it as a bar. I guess some people might be tired or not, but that's a good idea, right? Yes. Okay. We have Tom, you don't have a choice. You're coming. And then also on the 28th, there's this thing. I just heard it on the radio. Please feel free to click on the link here. It's dance choreography technical stuff. And when I heard it on the radio, I put it in the Slack. For those of you on the Slack, I put the link to the podcast. And if you don't have it, I'll try to send it again. The guy sounded so incredibly arrogant and uppity until I realized he actually knew what he was talking about. And then it was like, okay, fair enough. So it looks very interesting. So I hope there's interest for that too.
Yeah, I'd love to go. I love anything at the Somerset House. That's another place I'd love to go to. And at that event, they have margaritas, a special margarita. I think we should do that.
Don't forget, the word symposium does actually mean drinking together. So yeah, there may be some of that. So that's good. Peter Demetrius, we wish you could also be here. Maybe in the future, we'll have somewhere more practically convenient. Yeah, so today's discussion, just going through links there, 1 second, is a bit of a mess and a bit of a catch up, to put it that way. Lubricated ideas, exactly, Tom. I want to know some more stuff. So Deanie is doing the hard work of writing a report for our Sloan thing, and no, you don't have to help with that at all. But it may be useful, since this is the last month before the symposium, as in we have 3 weeks, to just you give opinions on some of these things. So if you follow that link, the first bit is something obviously we're going to be writing down, and if there's something
Can I mention something else to everybody about that, also how we're moving forward? So we have been given 3 years, but 2 years worth of money, which I've never seen in my 40 years of academic life. Never have I seen the money not match the time. And it was weird because when we submitted the grant, we asked for 2 years. We designate 2 years to match the funding. I didn't realize that they wrote us down for 3 years. And I didn't realize it until I looked at the new grant portal. And it's in the new grant portal. It's like, what? What? So anyway, it makes no sense to do that. And so we're going to ask for a third year worth of funds at the same amount we've gotten for each other year, with the exception of taking out the future of text piece, like not the Monday meetings, not the symposium, not the book. It's just the production, just the work, the project. And we're talking about moving in two directions because Frodo and I have very different scopes, right? And so he's going to continue with the textual explorations with the future of text, right? I'm going to continue with the work I'm doing with the next, which is involving 3D objects and text and images. And I'm working to pull in hypertext documents that can be text hyperlinked outside and use external links, and working with that inside the VR environment. So we're going different directions. So part of what we want to know from you for moving forward for the third year and for the second year report, which I've got to write, is what's left, what's next, what do you see as next? And I have an idea of how I'm moving forward, so I don't necessarily need that, but I think it would be helpful for us knowing how to work out the second year report and for Frode to continue with Fabienne. I'll be working with Andrew, and Fabienne is working with, from what I heard, is working with Frode.
Yeah, thank you, Dini. That was very important context. So, Fabian, what's this? What are the links? Could you introduce, please?
Yeah, sure. So the first one on top, that was on Lisa Strosfield and Muriel Cooper, information landscape and this kind of works, because I don't remember, I stumbled upon them a little while ago, and I think it's important work, probably misunderstood, including by myself, but it was probably a bit early, and they did, and Lisa Strofeld did also work in VR, which I'll link also after. But I think it's definitely worth exploring. And the last one, which was more pragmatic for Dini, and I think for everybody else too, but on the interlinking documents, the URL, especially when we work in WebXR, but regardless, is extremely powerful and typically estimated even by people working in there. Like, you can basically save the state in the URL, and this article, this short piece, actually it's pretty short, it's a good reminder for a lot of the possibilities. It's obvious, I mean, I shouldn't say this, is as expected about 2D, like a normal web page, but it obviously applies to 3D or even XR, as we're already doing a little bit, but I think it's a good reminder.
Thank you. The Straussfeld information art is certainly pretty. Right. Okay. I'm going to ask questions then, and I'm up to the. So, since this will be transcribed, I don't have to do any typing, which is wonderful. The first question, if I can reload my own page here. What do you all feel we have learned about actually working in XR, rather than what we thought of just ideas before we started playing with it? And Ken, you may not be the first to speak because you know the most. But of course, if you like to. Okay, Tom.
Well, after I've been struggling with this today a little bit because I'm working on my paper for you, the difficulty and of divorcing ourselves from existing paradigms of information storage. Again, getting back to paper and the metaphors that we're using in the XR environment, I recognize the need for them, but the more I read Ted Nelson, the more frustrated I am with them. So, I mean, I think that, this is something that I was kind of hoping that we could divorce ourselves from a little bit more. But I also recognize the primary dialogue in the scholarly academic world is through the medium of books and paper, and that this is ultimately a book and paper sourcing structuring event or structuring tool, as opposed to an idea structuring tool, and those are not synonymous. So anyway, that's the thing I think has been something that has really emerged as I've struggled with trying to wrap my head around the way the platform works.
I'm glad you mentioned that one, Tom. I do have a comment on that, and that is, I think at some point it'd be fun for us to think about inventing the ultimate academic document format. One of the neat things about data is that it's, even if it's binary, it's stored using the alphabet, right? And whether it's in hexadecimal or whatever it might be. So it's still text. It still has to be in a text form, right? So it does, some of it, of course, I think is great to have as an appendix and all of that stuff. But what is so exciting about the opportunity here is XR will need a new data structure that should be interchangeable. And hopefully that will help us upgrade the documents along what you're saying, Tom, as well.
So I was literally just watching the videos that Ted Nelson did about, must be about 10 years ago now, a little more than that, where he was going through the various iterations of Xanadu. And there was one version that he had, Xanadu Space, which is very much three-dimensional. It's displayed on a two-dimensional screen, but he has a three-dimensional aspect to it. And I could not help but think about what we've been working on as I watched that. And I was like, yeah, let's go down that road.
Except Ted doesn't want to do that, which is annoying. But yeah, of course. Dini.
Yeah, what's interesting is right now the universities across the United States are struggling because we've been told that what we produce for our students, even in the classroom environment, not even for online, has to be completely universally designed documents. So we're not allowed to use Word or PDFs anymore. We have to put everything into a system like Canvas, which then automatically turns them into something that's akin to HTML or is HTML. So right now, what I'm learning from the university system is that HTML is the system by which we should be producing everything that's completely accessible. And Mark's been arguing this now for what, 2 years to me. So Mark, you won. Know that it's okay for a program like mine, which is a very digital program, but my colleagues in history are struggling like crazy with how to do this because we can't even pass out handouts anymore. That's word-based handouts. I don't know what they're going to do. And Canvas, and a lot of us see this as an insidious way to get faculty to put everything in Canvas, which means the university owns it. So there's a big struggle among faculty to put their material into Canvas because we've always had our own intellectual property with the materials that we teach. So there's a lot of political stuff going on at the university right now, not just mine, but across the United States. But HTML is the language that we're supposed to be writing in.
That is super interesting, Dini. I saw a presentation the other day by a TA who explained what happens when they grade papers now and how it is, in this example, it was in Google Docs they had to use. But the system the university has, it does all kinds of automatic AI checking and all kinds of good stuff like that. So the fact that we have AI as a threat means that the systems have to respond, the university systems to deal with that, which doesn't exactly help with the openness of the data formats. It makes it even more, you got to do this to prove a point. So.
Well, the other problem is that once the university owns your material and it's in Canvas, they don't need to hire you anymore. So if you're on contract, then it's been done. So just recently, my university campus in Tri-Cities let go their contract anthropologist whose material was online, teaching online for the past several years. Now he's gone, but the material's still there and being taught by someone else cheaper. So that's a struggle that we're going through right now at the universities.
Wow. Ken, I hope you have something more better news or something.
Well, I had a question, which is, so Taylor Swift was upset because she didn't actually have ownership of her own material, so she re-recorded it, and now she owns the new recordings. So if you take all this Canvas stuff and you copy over your own stuff into HTML, do you own that?
As soon as it's in Canvas, university owns it.
Oh, so even if you created it, so you have to be careful not to put it into Canvas. But if you put it into your own thing first, but then Canvas, then you own it, or no? How does it work?
our program, because we're digital, we've never used Canvas. We use Slack,
Hmm.
Basecamp, and Zoom. So this has
Mhm.
not been a problem for us. We're
Right.
being forced to use Canvas, but I'm not going to do it for academic freedom, right?
Mhm.
But and I can also make my material as HTML, not a problem, right? But it is a problem if you don't know how to code or do any of that kind of work. But
Right.
Canvas,
At NYU, there's this blanket thing at NYU that faculty, that everybody owns their own copyrights. The university doesn't even go there.
we say that too, but then when it gets into Canvas, the university owns it. So that's why a lot of us don't want to use it at all.
All right.
Right. So
Well, there's nothing to stop you from deleting all your Canvas shells as you leave.
but they copy things themselves, right? And so
Yeah.
I've never had anything on Canvas except my syllabus
Hmm.
and my phone number.
Well, the stuff I have on Canvas is so basic compared to what I actually work on. It's not even funny. I think but I do think that there's a university policy around that varies from institution to institution, and there are a lot of different ways that that plays out. So it could very well be that the agreed upon IP at NYU is very different than at Washington State. So
It's coming across through the universal design movement and making things available to people with disabilities as part of that Disabilities Act. So it may not be implemented yet at university, but it might be coming. So just look for it. And Tess, yes, the expertise of faculty is not respected anymore. There's complete redesign of our university system going on, and no faculty's on it. It's being designed by administrators and staff. So that's another story.
that'll end well.
That's another fight.
Wow.
Fabian.
At NYU, the philosophy came out of the School of the Arts. You know, they have the famous School of the Arts and the film school and all that. And they realized there was no way they were going to be able to own the copyrights and still have that kind of creativity happen. So they just realized that if they're going to attract those sorts of artists to create things, they just couldn't go there. That's the history at NYU of why they're very careful not to claim ownership of copyright of faculty original work. I think it's actually a principle involved there.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting aspect, Ken. And just briefly, many years ago, I met with Selina Chow, now wife of Li Ka-shing, and we had developed some stuff, and one of our companies wanted to use it. And the CEO of that company said, quite honestly and nicely, why do we need to work with you? Why don't we just take what you've made? Why don't we just copy it? So I said, well, you can copy what we have done, but you cannot copy what we will do tomorrow. So that goes exactly to what Tess was saying. But it was refreshing to have this super rich, super powerful capitalist actually ask the question and not just pretend. So yeah, interesting issues there. Yeah, Fabian.
Yeah, I had a discussion a couple of days ago with an academic who was complaining that OneNote, I think, is not now, there is no free tier or something like this. So you cannot use just OneNote, you need to subscribe. And what they also did at the same time, the company behind it, they also removed the free tier, and there is no like GDPR data takeout. So you're literally stuck in there. You cannot extract your data, you must pay, which obviously is wrong. But I mean, but at the same time, I was a little bit provocative with this person to say that if you don't have the data, if the software you use here is not open source, you should be ready to get your knowledge kidnapped. It's not, also, again, it's wrong. It should not happen. But if you do this, it's like you're, and it's as an academic, but for most people, I mean, it's one of the most precious things you can do if you use knowledge management or personal information management. You put your ideas. You might pull your journal, like whatever you think or dream of or whatever. And if you give this to a random stranger on a server in the middle of nowhere, I mean, just don't do this. I mean, it will happen. Hopefully it never happens, but if it does, And if your whole set of tools are not open source and the data is not managed in a way that you can extract, convert freely, it's such a big risk. Like I'm really, I don't want to stress for others, but it's really like you're walking on thin ice. And as companies and cheatify basically, or they work so hard to get a monopolistic position, they're going to leverage that against you. And I think when it's just data, it's kind of a problem. But if it's like the tools that help you to think, I really don't think in most cases the risk is worth it. And for a tiny anecdote, I asked somebody to test on the Galaxy XR, which is the latest VR headset or XR headset of the moment, our work. And basically, it's a bit sluggish, which is strange. It shouldn't, but anyway, it works. And what's beautiful there is that none of us have Galaxy XR, and yet the work works on this new headset. And I mentioned this here, both because I'm happy, but also as an escape. Let's say if tomorrow I'll be a bit colorful, but if Meta say, fuck you, we remove or we disable whatever, you're like, okay, so what? Like you can literally shrug. And I think that's really important to be mindful of the, I call them adversarial dependencies, the things you rely on, and that might go contrary to your either intellectual, moral, or ethical position. You can only do that for so long until it bites you back. So relying on a WebXR, on standards, on open format, on open source and free software, it's literally liberating.
Mm-hmm.
I have to comment on that because it's so important, and of course I fully agree with you, Fabian, on this. This is also why I think the Chris Guttridge notion of icons is so important, because you should be able to. 1 second. Thank you, Ilka. Yeah, cool. Yeah. And it's something we've been experimenting with, and what we're doing now, Fabian and me, experimenting is when you export from Author, you get a optimized visual meta with smaller font and all kinds of stuff that Mark and Peter and I talk about. But you also get a sidecar JSON file, right? Because we just don't know what's useful in the future, but they have to be so incredibly readable that we can just give these to each other. It's just such a fundamentally important thing. And as far as I know, and I'm very glad you're here, particularly, Brandel, there isn't really a format for spatial knowledge. There are formats for spatial objects, but not the knowledge, right? Mark has talked about when you have a thing here, it can be many representations for a thing. Thank you, Dalton. And that's something I think we can do. We've mostly done it. You know, what Fabian already has is almost there. And so to be able to share that around like we had, I mean, the ACM demo we had, at the end of it, I don't know if you've all tried it, when you have taken things and made a spatial arrangement, and you leave, you can download the JSON for that. It's quite basic, but it is a thing. And the reason I'm highlighting this really, what? Oh yeah, no, I'm looking at the writing here, but I'm going to ask you to speak that, please, Brandel and Fabian. But the thing is, it leads to the previous discussion, because if we manage to do this in an open, simple way, academics will just have to use it. There won't be a choice. Knowledge is multidimensional. XR will be used in academia at some point, right? Apple's going to do something, or Meta, or whoever. But if we have a format, instead of like all these, I could waffle on forever. Brandel, would you mind, and Fabienne, speaking around what you pointed in here, please? It's so important. I mean, what you wrote, I mean, sorry.
There's a 3D format that that Apple has put its weight behind, and you know, I just on my own behalf, not talking on Apple's behalf, like I like it, and I think it is a good foundation for these things. It's started its life in Pixar, but it's sort of doing a lot of work for people, including at Meta, but in a lot of companies, IKEA and other places, where they're not just having 3D objects, but information about 3D objects and the relationships between them. um, we have something called the Alliance for Open USD, and we're having a meeting, face-to-face meeting on the 21st of November in San Francisco, where I just got confirmation that my friend who runs the SketchUp stuff is going to be staying at my place to be able to come along to, and so we'll be able to talk about some of the things that they understand about constraints and the relationships for constructive generation of spaces and knowledge about them. That's not textual and informational in the sense that it has sort of hews much closer to the actual spaces themselves. But I see those things as being related enough that I feel strongly that it's a good foundation for these things. You know, I really do love WebXR, and I also think that there's a deep need to climb a little bit higher up the sort of stack of abstraction. For people to be able to kind of reason about spaces rather than reasoning about pixels on the internet. That I really hope that we can kind of stimulate and progress. Add to that WebXR standard stuff. The Snap organization, Snap Spectacles, also has a WebXR browser now. Which I met with them last week, and it turns out that it's a WebKit browser, which is really exciting. But yeah, so I agree that there need to be standards, but I also think that there's an important need to kind of find the right level of abstraction for what that representation is, in order to make sure that the people who care about information at certain levels of reasoning have the ability to do so, and that browsers of the future have the ability to kind of construct safe spaces for navigating and manipulating information on appropriate terms for it.
That's fantastic and useful, Brandel. And I'm glad your hand up, Ken, because I have a question for you. But a brief question, Brandel, first. Is this something that, as an example, I should reasonably be able to expect my programmers to enable as an export from the 2D map I have in Author to be 3D once it's in space, or is it too overpowered for that?
USD is absolutely appropriate for that. Yeah, we don't have. Apple made a bad, dare I say, preliminary text schema, which it exists. You can still use it, but no other things other than the Apple thing will support it properly. But yeah, you can construct and compose three-dimensional graph data and do so in USD. We are working with other folks who care more about text, like even just internal CSS people, to talk about what's appropriate and necessary for the representation of textual information. And that's going well, but it's not part of the core specification. So the positional stuff, definitely, USD is more than appropriate for that. For the textual stuff, there's a little bit to come, but if folks want to be involved in sort of reasoning about it, you could even join and talk about it. Yeah.
That's brilliant, Brandel. Thank you. So, Ken, over to you. But do you already use USD, Ken? That's my question for you. And please go ahead.
Yeah. So that's part of what I was going to say is that I mostly do my research kind of, I have my DIY garage, I built my own tools and made my own lathe, metaphorically speaking. And I do not think that there is one correct answer. If I want to understand how automobiles work, I might just build my own car from scratch. But if I want to go on the highway, I'm going to buy an automobile that conforms to all the regulations. USD is absolutely what I would use if I were doing production, because everything talks to everything. Maya talks to Photoshop, it's really wonderful, but I don't do production. I'm trying to do things from first principles. So I'm building everything up in WebXR, writing my own shaders and all this kind of stuff. But if I were a production shop, I would absolutely use USD, because I would get access to all of the commercial software and there wouldn't be any issue of it importing. And you're running an analysis here and then you're seeing the visualization there and you don't have to do anything. But because I don't do that, I'm not using it these days. But that's, they're both are valid. The thing you build in your shop and the car that you drive on the highway to buy your groceries both coexist, and neither one is right. They both are necessary. Brendel, do you agree with what I said?
Absolutely, and that's the one of the major things that I will maintain to people is that WebXR is an essential, absolutely useful component for prototyping, and at the same time, that's not a reason per se for it to be sort of expanded to a much wider audience. When you're in a lab, when you're doing things where you control absolutely everything about it, it's perfectly reasonable. It's just the scope of the sort of the privacy implications of naturalizing people into the and habituating people to do that. I want to get labs access to eye tracking and to find an appropriate avenue to do that so that it happens without jeopardizing, the broader public case. I don't know what that looks like, and I don't have anything to report, but I think it would be really great to figure out who can have those things and what we can do to sort of constrain the context in which people get all of that exciting and terribly dangerous data as well. Even if it bakes permanently on, this thing is recording your eyes, then that would be it's perfectly appropriate for something like a research laboratory. So there's a complete difference between what people need to do in production based on the fact that state security is at risk when people mess things up, and what kinds of keys and capabilities are essential for folks to be able to kind of do the best work they can within the lab.
I'm just smiling. Peter, please go ahead.
Okay, I just like to push back a little bit on the idea that HTML is the optimal format. Authoring it is really ugly, especially if you're actually looking at the raw markup. And also, it doesn't have support for overlapping selections. And I think for academics, overlapping selections are really important. I mean, you can sort of work around the back door and jump through some hoops to simulate the effect of having overlapping selections, but really, having standoff markup makes vastly more sense since I'm not dependent upon having, yes, Dina, you want to step in for a sec?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just the kind of stuff that a faculty will have to upload as HTML is just like a syllabus. There's no JavaScript. There's no CSS. It's just pure HTML. So it's ugly, and I don't disagree with you, but it's not as robust as like, I don't know, dynamic website with PHP. Does that make sense, Peter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because what I'd like to see is standoff markup. And of course, the real beauty of that is I can then mark up a document that I don't own. And that's really important. I won't necessarily have any kind of access to your original. I can't directly comment on it. But if I can layer on additional annotations and let a smart viewer merge those together, like the old link servers that we had back in the 90s, that kind of an approach seems to be a lot more useful. The other real critical thing, I think, is the idea of supporting multiple domain-specific languages. DSLs are the most sensible way for people in different academic disciplines to be able to express their ideas. So in order to go for a DSL model, what you have to have is the ability to spin up new notation formats, have those notation formats associated with a nice grammar. I'd lean to parsing expression grammars, augmented with some support for mutable state so that you can build symbol tables as you're going through a document and reference those in semantic predicates. Having semantic predicates and unbounded look ahead are really critical for writing sophisticated and complicated grammars. But the problem there is that the DSL authoring languages are kind of ugly, and they force you to mix the DSL notation for describing how your peg is going to look. So that's one notation, and intermixing that with little snippets of JavaScript. And that's ugly. What we need is one uniform language, as close to natural language as possible, so that you could be expressing how your grammar should be structured at a very high level. Then we can translate that into a peg or a notation for maybe some Rust-based library we want to use. So we want to completely abstract out the implementation going from the grammar to a parser generator for that grammar to implement it somewhere from the description of the notation itself. So we want that's basically an abstract notation. We can think about what basic minimum bits of computation we could support in any different implementation. So then I'm not locked into using the PEGI.js library. I'm working at a higher level. Then we go from that higher level to PEGI.js or one of the Lua PEG generators or whatever language we need for our implementation in the lab at the developing the demo level. And that's separate from our having the universal DSL description language of some sort. They'd be the equivalent of the work Brendel's doing for universal descriptions of 3D scenes. This would apply to descriptions of domain-specific languages, and then we can start tying those together. But the beauty is if you support that, then the chemists can go off and come up with a chemistry DSL that lets them, in close to natural language as possible, describe their chemistry ideas in their academic writing. The anthropologists can go and define some high-level anthropology objects in their own little taxonomy and have that supported. And then we can use the language engineering machinery to go and build implementations that can work with those things. So that's sort of the direction I'd recommend moving in.
Thank you, Peter. Fabienne, and then, yeah.
So from a prototypist standpoint, and I think it was important also, like as Ken reminded us, it's different process if we're building in a context where it's production, maybe scale, etc. From a prototypist viewpoint, I don't give a shit. I don't care. It can be even like a .txt file, can be JSON, can be USD, can be GLTF, can be like some old school format like VRML. Like it's really not a problem. It's the only question, and especially because we have a rather modular architecture, and it's nothing brilliant. Everybody does it. Like if you use, for example, 3JS, when I put the link, it's not USD in the core of 3JS, it's an add-on. So you like USD, you load it, you load then the content from it, no problem. You want another format, you load that. And we do the same, basically. We have a set of filters, they are kind of cascading. It really, how it's done doesn't really matter. The point is, if we switch tomorrow to another format to either load something or export for it, it's not necessarily a big deal. The only question is, what must we do, or what do we actually need to do? Not what would be cool, but what do we need to do that none of the format that we support can do? Because otherwise, like, it doesn't really mean anything to say, hey, this format is better than this one or that one. It's what is like, for example, if you optimize a lot, if you want a huge number of polygons, but then it becomes important, let's say, to have some way to compress. But if you don't do this, if you play with 3 cubes, then you don't need a format that handles that. So here to discuss about which of the format is best without hitting first an edge case that is, oh, actually we cannot do this in the current configuration, is I don't think it's, at least for me in terms of implementation, like if we need to build something tomorrow and thus we must support this or that format, because there are extensions to formats too. There are a lot of ways to either contribute or say, no, this is not good enough, we need a new one. But until there is something that is clearly isolated, that is like, it is impossible to do otherwise with any of the format we support, then the kind of ideal format, at least for me, it's impossible to try to implement, because like there are countless others. And we don't have to be exclusive. That's also the whole point about filters and our modular architecture. You can support any of those you want to. You can like something hybrid. It's really fine. So without the pinpointing the one thing we really have to do that is infeasible otherwise, picking one over the other or extending one that exists or making an entirely new one, I cannot even like conceptualize it.
So I have thoughts on that, and it relates on the last few, and I think it's really, really important. Obviously, I'm a huge proponent of basic text. The whole thing that I'm writing now is about the notion of augmented text, which can mean so many things. And one of the things when you're talking about standoff markup and so on, Peter, is in an environment, annotations should probably be stored separately from the thing itself, right?
Definitely.
So there's two other things, and I really love this icon notion. So what I'm really looking at here is, personally, I would like a spatial format that is XYZ, and that's basically it, with an ID, and that is one thing. Separately is a list of what those IDs represent, right? Because one of them could be a URL to a 2 million polygon model. One could just be the word yes, right? So to try to separate them, because I really feel that when you move things in space, conceptually, if you pretend you're not a computer scientist, which most of you are, there isn't a lot of data there. This is here, that is there, right? And of course, if you need a full scene description, that is something else, where the lighting is or what links to it or whatever, fine. But just like Fabian was saying, I think it would be really, really great to have extremely basic layouts that point to what the thing is. Because I dream of having a very normal looking academic paper in PDF or something horrible. There is a rectangle somewhere that has a bunch of numbers in it that refers to something in the appendix or whatever. You tap on it when you're in the headset, and then things appear, right? Very often, I think these things are going to be, as Mark so beautifully said, little spheres. To you, it means something, not to anyone else. They don't have to have a lot of stuff, each one of them, right? And what they represent is something else. And all they need to have behind them is, here's the label, here's the stuff about it. And finally, because this is a bit obvious, the orientation, the rotation, I think we can call irrelevant. Ken works in environments where there's a lot of billboarding for everybody in the space. Fabienne has another billboarding approach. These are, in a sense, end user rendering choices, right, at the very basic. But we should be able to have a hierarchy of super simple to more advanced layouts. Just my dream. Ken, please.
I wanted to briefly update people on things that have been going on in our lab that are relevant to this. One, which is a little bit nerdy, but I feel good about it, is that I built my own little handy dandy line font and super optimized it so that I can have, the dream of the Memory Palace, walk around in my Quest 3 and it renders fast enough, even though I have tremendous amounts of text and I can zoom them infinitely. So I just made myself a sort of a text rendering primitive that's super fast and I can play around with it, but as a programmer, I can make things bold or italic or this or that, or make them swim. So I have that, down to the stroke level. And I've been playing around with that to see whether that helps me in understanding how to walk around in a space. So that's really nice because I can have really large amounts of text and it doesn't slow down on my dinky little, Qualcomm processor on my Quest 3. And then the other thing is that presentation tool that I showed you guys, we've now in our lab have now used WebRTC. So now in addition to being a presentation tool, which I use for all my teaching, both in person and over Zoom, it's now also usable as a one-on-one replacement for Zoom, except that we have complete control over, I put 2D material there, 3D, we do code editing, we do this, we do that. And so we're starting to experiment with what will it feel like when we're just doing all this active stuff between us, but it's all face-to-face. So we've gone to that phase now. We needed to sort of push through and get the WebRTC video done, but now that we've done that, we're now using it as a communication tool. And so obviously it will have implications eventually, potentially for sooner or later, we put on the glasses and the stuff's floating in the air between us. But right now, given the current hardware, we're just using it as a screen-based communication tool.
That is super cool. And I have to selfishly ask, are any of these pieces of tech available for use with what we're doing with Sloan?
Yeah, we should. I mean, we're cleaning it up now. We're planning to open source it. I'm kind of hoping that by the time we all get to London, I have it properly documented and everything so that that can actually just, we can make that a first release. I don't want to release it before it's cleaned up because, you know, you have hack code in there. But I think it's now to the point where I should be able to make that happen in the next few weeks.
That's fantastic. Big smiles from London. Yeah, wonderful. Over to the guy with the new glasses.
Okay, 2 points. Going back to the very, very beginning about what working with the headset revealed, I wouldn't have thought otherwise. And that was how fluid and comfortable it was to use jump teleportation to move around in a virtual space. Um, I really expected to have motion sickness issues, and I certainly found that whenever I was in a game or something on the headset that started moving my viewpoint, it's like slewing through the environment, I started to feel very woozy because I didn't have the connection. Now, I could walk easily with no problem, but that only works for as much free space as you have around you to be strolling in your living room. And when you start coming up against the walls, then you had to get creative and reverse direction, flip the scene around, and then walk in the other direction to very slowly zigzag back and forth like a mountain switchback in order to move forward in the virtual world. Whereas just jump teleportation caused no nausea issues whatsoever. It was rock solid. It was like the Jumper movie. Um, and that suggests that there are a lot of things that you could do in three-dimensional layouts that aren't directly within arm's length of you that could be comfortable because of that navigation modality. So I'm still thinking about how I'd take advantage of that now that I know using that is rock solid and doesn't cause the issues. I don't know if any of you have had trouble with jump navigation. I certainly have it, and I'm pretty sure that I'm a good canary in the cage for anything that's going to make you nauseous. So if
I
it's
just
not
wanted
bothering me, it should be good for everyone, I hope.
just wanted to immediately respond to that. The issue that we have with jump navigation is it's fantastic, but every time we try to do research in co-located XR, it's not relevant to that problem domain. So that's why we haven't embraced it as a general purpose navigation solution.
Why isn't it relevant? Just curiosity, Ken.
Yeah.
You and I are in the same physical world. So
Um,
the biggest superpower we have is you know what I'm looking at. And jump navigation defeats that.
I thought the
Oh,
spectral persona that Apple offered in the Vision Pro was very, very cool. And I was hoping to see more of that developing. That's very
hmm.
useful.
So
Well,
Ken, you're talking about physically co-present
Yeah, yeah.
co-presence
I mean,
rather than telepresent co-present.
right. For telepresent, it's great. It's
Yeah.
fantastic, and we use it for that. It's just when a lot of our research is on you and I are in the same room and stuff's floating in the air between us, and I
Mhm.
can't use it for that.
I think maybe Disney's Hollow Tiles would be the solution there because they could be independently moving you and someone else in the same room in different directions so that in the virtual environment you're moving and jumping around, but the tiles themselves could slowly drag you so you don't accidentally walk into someone else who's in the room with you. So that's sort of like a hardware solution to that issue. Um, Also, as far as being able to see what someone's looking at, I don't think there'd be a problem with cloning yourself in the 3D environment if you had the processing power so that I could jump while also leaving my original where it was. Sort of like moving off in an astral projection kind of a mode. So I could be jump navigating around for my astral projection. You'd still see me with my facial expressions as they are. You just wouldn't be aware where my astral body is unless it was within your point of view at the same time. So we might be able to sort of fudge that and get creative.
We do have something that's kind of like that in the sense that in our WebXR system, I can do a gesture with my hands and then teleport my hands so that I see a copy of my hands way across the room and I
Oh,
can pick something
brilliant.
up and remote things. But I'm not moving. I'm just getting that sort of, you know, magical superpower of grabbing an object across the room and bringing it to me.
Yeah, Curtis Hickman did some experiments along those lines, trying to give people the illusion that they had Mr. Fantastic stretchable hands. And basically, in VR, he'd show your arm stretching, whereas in real world, he'd be moving the object you were stretching towards closer so that you'd be able to make contact with it.
Thank you. Over there, I think there's going to be more comments on this, but let's go over to Tess and then do a return.
Oh, my thing is so painfully lo-fi compared to astrally projecting within the virtual world. But when you were talking about augmented text before, Frode, um, you know, when you were talking about seeing sort of the citations on the side, one thing, there's certain things Kindle does very well that Kindle has given us augmented text. If I click on a word, it'll take me to the definition or the Wikipedia, but it leaves me in the text itself. And one thing, I don't know why, because it seems like a very simple interface, and it would be just a very simple thing in the future of text, is footnotes. Sometimes footnotes are just citations and there's no need while you're reading to look at them, but sometimes footnotes are actually really important. It's actually information that could be incredibly useful while you're reading something. And for my interaction with my Kindle, I don't know why it is, but I can click on them and go out of the document to the end, or I can wait until the end to see them, but I can't have an in-screen experience so that I can see, oh, this has been footnoted. What is it? Oh, that's good information to have that I can keep in mind while I'm reading. And so that's just, again, I feel really lame. It is not stretchy hands at all, but or anything nearly that interesting, but it would certainly be something very useful while we're reading textual artifacts.
It's a very, very important thing because you could say that paper footnotes are an early type of hypertext because they refer to other places. And as I wrote on the side here, Mark made me add a feature which functions through Visual Meta, where you're reading a PDF, you come across a footnote, you click on it, and you get the footnote in a little pop-up window. It is a form of author annotation, of course. So it relates to what Peter was talking about earlier. You should be able to, like you kind of have in Kindle, different kind of selections of text. And now we're getting into the layering, which is hugely important because in a spatial environment, these footnotes should be able to behave in much more interesting ways. And as we write things, we all academically, you write some sort of an abstract or introduction. How that relates to the rest of the text is kind of a top level. Then you have the body, and then you have the footnotes and references as support. As I keep banging my head against the wall, ceiling, wherever, with all of these things we're dealing with, it always comes down to the quality of the data, as I'm sure is no surprise to anyone here. Whether we refer to the aspect of it that's metadata or the text itself is a bit secondary. And as Dini was talking about earlier, how we're being forced to surrender our data and lose stuff. It's really, really important. And the specific use you mentioned there, Tess, is so useful. Fabienne, banging head against the virtual world could be a gesture. Yeah, like shaking the iPhone to undo. That's funny. The thing is, where are you, Mark? There you are. You're coming up next. Mark and I, we often talk opposite in the sense that Mark very often understands the data, the metadata, the systems really, really well. I'm an artist kind of guy floating up here, and there's a lot of creative tension between those two. And going forward, the dream is that we take the knowledge that those of you who really understand the academic infrastructures, and we recreate it in a perfect way for us at the time. And we use XR as the excuse. And people say this isn't backward compatible. We say we don't care, right? This is for the future, and we move things in. Because for XR, for spatial knowledge, we will need something new, whether it's USD or something simple. It doesn't really matter. But it means that whatever systems we build, so Tess, adding an endnote or a footnote, adding a reference, the level of information, and as Fabienne pointed in the very beginning here, addressability, we actually have an opportunity to do it now. It's just ridiculously exciting. So I believe Fabienne has something to show us. Is that right, Fabienne, or do you have a comment before you're going to show us?
It is right, but I think maybe if Mark wanted to close on that, I can show right after.
Yeah, please. So we'll go to you, Mark. And then if you guys have any more thoughts on what's on that page of questions, of issues, or what you've learned, please type it in here on the side and we'll talk about it. But Mark and then Fabian, demo time.
So I'll go quickly as we want to get to Fabian's demo, and I'll put this as succinctly as I can, choosing my words carefully because I want to avoid a sort of binary comparison. But one of the big things I've taken away from this couple of years odd is the actually quite significant difference I hadn't considered in the way that XR, XR more than a 2D space, exposes another aspect of lack of common understanding. So people used to say about, I listen to the radio rather than go to the films because the pictures are so much more vivid. What we see in XR is not necessarily what other people see. So we now have an extra sort of almost axis of ambiguity. And some poles of this are that what the XR represents is what you see in the XR. Another pole of that is what you see in the XR is just a hint of what may lie beyond it. And resolving those two, I think, has proved difficult. And I think it is one of the things that sort of, and the fact we haven't actually quite resolved that is one of the things that makes a lot of progress difficult, because essentially there are some very significant differences in the way that any given person looks the same way. Another succinct way of putting it is, it's like color blindness. When I say blue to you, I have no idea if you actually see the blue that I see in here. We're happy to both call it blue, and in most cases, it doesn't matter right until the point where we actually make that blue present and we realize it's not the same thing. I'll stop there and let Fabian share something.
That's actually quite perfect that you say that now, Mark, because what Fabian will show is amazing. And I just want to highlight two things that we're working on for this, and that is one of the key aspects of virtual reality for me is the spatiality can change. So we're talking about these different blues. To be able to tap on a wrist or do some interaction and everything around you is different is amazing. So that is one of the things we're going to be doing, and Fabian's going to show us now. Or actually, Fabian, do you want me to show the video while you talk maybe? What's best for you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can show the.
I will do that.
In case people have difficulties, as usual, I put the link in the chat so that you can view it directly or try it also, because the links are live.
I'm just going to for a second because I've never done it before. Do you see me in the corner?
Yes. Nice.
Yep.
Okay. Hang on. I'm going to move you guys to the other side here. Make you smaller. I'm going to put this on a loop.
Can you pause it actually? And in the description.
Yeah.
In the description of the video, there is another link to show first to show a little bit the problem before the solution.
So I go, which one? Way to manage?
Yeah, this one first, please. Which should show a big mess. Yes, perfect. That's what we want. This or the demo from the second quarter. So we can see some of the videos about the project. So a little bit of meta aspect. We can see some Bob Horn mural.
Don't worry. Keep talking, please.
It's easier if you.
I was just going to give links here for everyone. I'll do it really quickly. Sorry, 1 second. A mess, a solution. So you can all go to the page and try both of these whenever you want. So now go back to the video or to the live. Here you go.
Yes. So it's a mess, and what's also important to see is that there are, I think, like 5, 10, 15 different type of files, including here the tapestry. So we load those files and we get the content from the files, and all those pieces of content, those elements, they are manipulable. So you can pinch in them, move them around, which is a good way for us to test what is actually support. And I hope also a way to, let's say, get people excited about XR, that it's not just like one document. It's a bunch of document. It's a bunch of different types of document. Basically, it's rich, including the quote unquote boring flat ones, let's say a PDF behind, because it is still, especially in academia, it is like one way to convey. But
yeah. I'm just going to save this so I can show the video. And please remember, everyone, if you go with your headset to our Future Text Lab, click on authorship. We keep adding things on here. So this is just, it's for our own use, hence not the big title. Right. Are we ready for the video?
I am, at least.
You are at least. Okay, well, you're the one who counts for this. I'm going to wind back, and here we go.
And so the very first part is that we load actually the same kind of data, not all of it, but part of it. And now it's nearly the same, except that the elements are hidden. We can toggle them to show or hide them, and then we see them again. And we see, so we just also to prove that we can manipulate them, including the console. And once we have them, it can be overwhelming. So then we can play with the layouts. We can have different ways to have them either as lines or columns or grid. And the space around them, which is symbolized here by the single color wireframe, is to say this, the data there is bounded within that volume. And then there are affordances change the volume and they're applied to everything in it. We also have a list of files, so the tapestry, the video here, which is via a PureTube API. And the last one, I don't remember which format it is, but it doesn't really matter. The point is we manipulate, here we can open and close or fold and unfold and apply a set of different modifications, like for example, layout to a set of elements. And the hope there, which is why it was good, I think, to show the initial mess, is to say it's like having things on your desk. If it's literally just a mess, it is more stress than excitement, let's say. If your desk is empty, there is no excitement, no stress, which is nice too, but then you can't do anything much to build on this. Whereas if you have those, both of them, namely mess and not mess, being able to manage basically the complexity, then I think the richness is more something that you want to play with and build with. So yeah. And the layout, the different functions are just examples as per usual. They are on the boundaries of the cube, the faces of the cube, or ways to put such comments. So each of the comments, they are limited to what is for that specific file. And we can, so I'm trying to adapt the filters now to do whatever the formats we supported until now. Then we can have this, this same way to manage the content. Thank you.
That felt really nice. Thank you, Fabienne. So much there. And it addresses the key issue, which is managing knowledge in space, right? Yeah, that was. But while we think about that, because we're not leaving it, I have a quick question for Fabienne. Excuse me, Brandl. Are you talking about the French race driver thing that's on the Apple Vision? When you talk about the Canal Plus MotoGP, because it's not very good, which is interesting. So back to this important topic. Oh, Brandl's out and about. Hello, Brandl.
You didn't like the MotoGP. I thought that the very naivety of it was fascinating. The realization that, to sort of further to Mark's point, the non-uniformity of experience, the fact that people don't know how to curate something that happens at such a in such a vast expanse of a visual view, is a really fascinating kind of state for cinema and movie making to be in, and sort of indicative of the kinds of things that the variability of experience that's going to come from not being able to control people's focus with typical sort of cinematographic techniques. And so it's actually not so much that it's bad, is that it's completely at odds with any kind of filmmaking capabilities that anybody's kind of developed at this point.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Brandl. And I wonder, considering what we just saw, how this relates to not just linear storytelling, but also this spatial that Fabian showed. But Mark, please go ahead.
Yeah, it was just a quick sort of thing that popped in my head listening to, when you said at the end and talk about sort of managing knowledge in space. And I realized, so another tension here is whether you're actually managing known things or actually you're exploring unknown things. And I'd freely say that almost all my work is exploring unknown things. So it doesn't want the certainty. And that's one of the, I think, the other tensions that's crept into the work here. Because if you're trying to build things that have, because you want them to have clarity in a particular view, that's fine. But then you've lost all the ambiguity that allows you to explore a sort of latent space that is as yet not fully defined. So there's an interesting tension there. I'd put it as no more than that. And that's something I echo perhaps for in our write-up of the work, is something that perhaps we didn't explore early enough. Thanks.
Quick point there, and I don't know if it's managing. So I mentioned before personal information management. To me, the management part here is rather positive term in the sense that I feel like anytime you have to do something interesting, there is a level of complexity you have to manage. I think it's really hard to do something new or explore with very few things. It's possible, but it hasn't been my experience usually. And thus it's not meant. Also, maybe the grid example or the layout is a little bit not rough, but constraining. So first of all, just to say, you don't have to use the layout. It is really a per user action. The commands to do the layout, for example, first you can not use them. You can modify them in the headset, and you can move them also. So you can also move them out of the way. And one thing that probably it was way too quick, so I don't think it was highlighted properly when I recorded the video. But if you turn, let's say, an item, one here was a thumbnail of a video. If you turn it and you you apply your layout to the elements, then the video was still turned. So basically, the idea is to try to keep if you have personalized something, then you should not break it. If you force the layout on, if you want, of course, the forced layout, you still should do it. But that everything that is been like customized basically by the user should not be, let's say, forced within a frame or layout, let's say, that they want to. So it's not, at least, it's not meant as a way to force a specific both viewpoint and ways to force the layout. Also, I have to be super pragmatic. The cubes as volumes or the cuboids, it's easier than like a completely like a cloud, basically. That's really, it's feasible and it's technically not necessarily a problem, but to manage that, I don't think it's the best way to start. At least it's too much work for me both to implement and to think about. So having little wireframes of cuboids make this easier. But yes, I can see that it might look very forcing, let's say, elements within a very limited configuration, but it's not meant as such, at least.
I just hop in to say, I just want to clarify that the comment I just made wasn't actually, in a sense, a critique of what Fabianus has been saying. It was just a wider point that sort of popped into my head. I suppose it's also behind the fact that something that Fred had picked up earlier about me talking about spheres. The whole reason I talk about spheres is the sphere is going to look the same from whichever angle you look at it. And that was a reaction to having conversations where you said, well, okay, it doesn't have to be a square. It doesn't have to be a sphere. It can be a triangle. People said, so we're talking about triangles now. I said, no, we're just talking about objects in space. One of the things I really like from the work we've done is this idea of a knowledge object. It's just an object. It's whatever you want it to be. It doesn't have to have a literal shape. I mean, half of the closer you are to the exploration rather than the rote management end, that degree of ambiguity and plasticity, I think, is massively empowering. It probably becomes an impediment when you get to the more literal end, where you might be literally doing something as hard-edged as documentation of a protocol or something, where you don't want ambiguity, and you want relationships to not change. But anyway, I just wanted to clarify. So the comment was absolutely not in opposition to what Fabienne has been showing. Thanks.
This is just beautiful, this kind of discussion, because the key thing that we're trying to communicate, well, that I'm trying to communicate anyway for the future of text this year with the work, is based on the notion that different information, different tasks requires different interactions and views, which I know we all agree on. So when Mark, you're talking about dealing with stuff you don't know, and then someone else is doing authoring, that is why it's so amazing to be able to completely change your view. And this is why the annotation that we've been working on is so important, because you go from reading something specific and annotating inside a document and then taking out that shape, as we can do now, or being in an environment with all the current proceedings presented to an extent. So you do the information triage and you decide on some of them. And then you decide, now it's time to write the next paper. You probably want to have very different capabilities, layouts, views, and to take things with you. And Mark, you pointed out, I think a week or two ago, that if you change the background environment, should the information also change, and or should the layout change? These are the very important questions we have to address. And there are so many capabilities that Fabienne has provided, but he provides them, as a line of code, you left hand pinch to exercise them. To execute them. It's now fun to think about how we can use the mana menu for that, or the ring menu for that. So one notion we're experimenting is you explicitly say, I want a different background, leave all the information as it is. Maybe it's for aesthetic reasons. Maybe it's because you want to be able to put all your stuff there and so on. And I could talk for 2 hours, but Fabienne's hand is up. So please go ahead, Fabienne.
It's actually, it's funny that Peter shared the holotile just earlier, because right before this meeting, one way to connect this idea of switching the environment and potentially some of the interaction based on, let's say, a new context, to roughly summarize what I understood at least, is that you step on a new tile, and that tile then, because unlike like pinching with hands or whatnot, typically you want to move and you have a radical new viewpoint. So you can imagine that as you step on a virtual tile, then you hide or show, so some of the interaction I was showing before, based on your position. So you can switch, let's say, like Leon was showing last week, I think, the auto env. So you enter a directory and suddenly, for example, you switch to a Python environment and all the libraries are loaded, or you switch to another just by entering a new directory. But here the analogy would be that you step onto a tile and then you switch the environment, the context, and the way it's been displayed. So to give an example of the one based on the video just earlier, is you load the environment with your 5 files, for example, and they are displayed a certain way with layouts, some of them customized. But then if you step on a tile, then you close 3 of those files and 2 remain open, and they are a certain way. You step on the other tile and then you close those 5 files and you have 6 other files open, and again a certain way. So I think that could be probably, I haven't tried it, so it's really speculative, but I think some of the way that it forces us to move in space to get a new perspective. So I think that could be a rather natural way to do it.
Dini was talking about this earlier today, actually, about how she worked. And Dini, please take over when I remind you what I'm talking about. Walking around the space and having the space changing depending on where you are, right?
Yeah, so when Steve Gibson and I were doing the motion tracking project, we could do 6 wall projections, so it's really quite profound. And we could program the room, the space, so that when you walk to a specific place holding the tracker in your hand, through it's an infrared tracker, it would trigger a change in the environment immediately, right? And so you could do that all through the space. You'd be walking around, and 1 minute the space is this, and you could walk somewhere else and it's that, right? And it was quite useful. We were developing performance pieces that were game-like. So there were levels, trying to get people to, learn how to use the tracking system and get used to the three-dimensional space that was programmed. Anyway, yeah, it was very cool. So we were doing that back in 2004, 5, 6, and onward until about 2009, when the system needed to be updated because of the change in the computer systems, right? So it was it denigrated through time.
Yeah, thank you, Deanie. I'm so glad you mentioned that today. And the whole thing of things becoming unusable is why I so desperately want a very, very, very simple spatial positioning system that it's like the most basic markup. Anybody can just take it into another system. If it's not perfect, doesn't matter, but at least it doesn't disappear. Ken.
Okay.
You're muted.
I just wanted to mention, just because we're on the general topic, I did something a number of years ago that I thought worked pretty well. If I'm in a virtual reality space, I put mirrors up, and they're actually mapped to physical walls. And basically, I see myself in the mirror, but I see myself in another room. And if I go up to the wall and I touch my reflection, we exchange places. And I just found that was a really quick way of jumping from room to room without losing my sense of physical locality. I become my reflection, and then you can just travel from room to room really fast without losing your sense of I'm here. So that worked pretty well.
That's ridiculously cool. Obviously, you built that properly in an environment, but something like I think both Apple and Meta have now with widgets on the walls.
Mhm.
It'd be very useful. I have been looking into doing widgets to, it would be useful to have that kind of knowledge there always. So when you then click on it, it just doesn't function. But there is something really brief I wanted to mention. I was working in the headset in the Vision Pro the other day, got a phone call from a friend, and she was on a normal phone. So I did my virtual face to her, and she didn't realize it was virtual to begin with. But then I asked her to turn on her phone camera. And even though I was on the headset, she wasn't virtual. I made the view really quite large. So when she then, showed me around her apartment that I've seen before, the difference in presence was amazing. Right. And even the meeting we have today, even if it's not 3D heads, if it was spatialized, it becomes something really interestingly different. So to then add, Ken, magical mirrors that also are portals. This is when we're really talking about magic here. So
It's only fun if it's magic.
any sufficiently advanced technology, right? Oh, Peter, yes, CyberDog, OpenDog, exciting. That's a massive rabbit hole. Well, also I see in the chat here we're talking about dancing. I mean, gestures is the beginning of dance, right? And we talk about the importance of going for a walk, spatial information that way. Once the tracking is better, absolutely, we should be able to express ourselves and interact more visually. More richly. So we don't have that much.
The project that I was mentioning is C. Gibson's he's actually a musical composer doing electronica. And so the grant we had was a Canadian Foundation and Innovation grant. And his argument was, and this was back in the early 2000s, right? And broadband was just starting to kind of take hold. And his argument for the grant was the best way to show that broadband works and high speeds are important is through music. And if we can coordinate through music and sync up dance, music, images, etc., then we can show an effective system. And so his lab was located in Victoria. Mine was at the time in Dallas, and then I moved to Vancouver, Washington. And our labs talked to each other. So his wall projections would show up in my lab, and my wall projections would show up in his lab, and we could share the environments. He played the bass, and I played the melody. And we would harmonize through the internet connection through projections on the wall, showing each other's labs simultaneously. So the grant did that. But ultimately, what it allowed us to do is a lot of multimedia performance work that could show that we could perform telework, right? So we call it telebodies is what our term was, a telebody. So we were projecting over, telecommunication systems at the time. And it was not a cave, Brandel. Caves are very static and very expensive. They were $500,000 and this system was 30,000. It's called GAMS. And unfortunately it just went out of production, and I couldn't raise the money to go in to create the new one. And so it's now all dead tech. All we have left are the videos that we made.
It's just so fascinating, that work, Deanie. And when you talk about music, a few years ago, I met with John Morai at Keio University, and he made the point that he believes in God. He's religious, and he says he believes in God because of the size of the circumference of the Earth and the speed of light allows us to have a real-time music. If the Earth was bigger or the speed of light was slower, it will be out of sync. I'm not saying he's right, even with those numbers, but Deanie, what you're talking about with using music as a kind of a communication and synchronization and bandwidth issue, it's really quite beautiful. Fabienne, your yellow hand is up.
Yes, thank you. I recommend to check this quick video. I will not show it, and I recommend you check it carefully because it's a bit of a mess. But the idea, I can describe it, and I think everybody will understand, is I don't know who discovered this, but you can plug what's the name, a Quest 3 on whatever you want, basically, as long as you got USB-C to HDMI or whatever. So I'm plugging my video projector on the headset, so there is no app. You directly, so it's really messy as you can see, but what's funny is my video projector is on a battery. So what happens is I can walk around with the video projector that shows my perspective. And as my perspective changes, so somebody can be with me, they don't wear the headset, obviously, but they can still see what I'm looking at. It's not you can think of it kind of as a virtual cave. There is no setup. Again, no app, no nothing, all on battery, both headset and the video projector. I'm not exactly sure what to do with it, but some of the discussion with the cave reminded me of it. I think, of course, if you want to show some of the potential of VR to somebody who doesn't want to wear their headset, and potentially also some interaction, because you can hand them the controller. The problem is it's projected, so it is very much flat. Even though the projector moves in space, the person outside of VR sees it as flat. But I think there is quite a bit of potential also for exploration.
Fabienne, you can mount a micro projector on your Quest 3.
Yes.
And they see what you're seeing where you're seeing it.
Yes, a discussion with a friend who is doing what's the name? Laser Dance video game for the Quest 3, and that was indeed he's an expert, let's say, in recording quality content in very convoluted and yet high-end ways. And that was his first question: is like, how heavy is your video projector? This one is like 2 kilos, so it's I mean, you get tired quick. It also like auto keystone, so I would have a bit of adjustment, but yes, we discussed about it. And yes, it's you need to move slowly, I think, but it's definitely feasible. Have you tried it, Ken, actually, to strap it on? No.
Oh, Ken, you're muted.
I think I haven't tried it. I think it's a brilliant idea. I know that there are also really, really tiny micro projectors.
Yes,
that
yes.
you can buy that would easily, that you wouldn't even feel the weight of them. There are a bunch of them that you could certainly just go right onto your head.
It's also historically interesting for two reasons, of course. One is early theories of vision was that vision was projected from the eye, which is odd. The other one, of course, as Ken will be quick to point out, this is how ray tracing works. It goes from your eye outwards, not the other way around. So But also, Fabian, the horrible and bad thing of this is it may tell people they don't need a headset.
Yes, indeed, which is why I insisted that it is not volumetric. And if you give somebody a controller, they might think, why even, what's the point? So it's a really, it's a tricky thing. I think that's why I say things to explore, but it's still very much, you give them the wrong idea probably. So if people already have put VR on, then they can imagine. But if they've never put it, then it's tricky.
Randall, are you in the cafe?
No, just the break room in the office.
Okay, the ceiling looked similar.
Yeah.
Such great memories from those moments there. Yeah. Well, this was very useful, and as is on that webpage for today's thing, if you have any further thoughts you'd want to tell me about what we have learned, what was harder, what made sense, what didn't make sense, whatever, it's very, very useful for us to put into what we're doing. And we're now looking really at trying to figure out what is special about XR. And I think it's really difficult, really, really difficult. And one of them is the instant change. And we don't know what that means yet, but we're trying. And I have a little dream that when you first get into this, you get to choose your space in this context being defined as background environment plus data, just to have an arbitrary name for it. An example would be you're in there working on your article for the future of text along the other articles, and you have all the name of your fellow authors there. It'd be really, really cool to snap and suddenly you're organizing something else with the same names, right? So Fabian has built an absolute wealth of interactions and opportunities, and now we're just trying to package them into simple presentations, which is difficult. But yeah, we're coming up to the hour. Any final comments from anyone? Ken, will you be doing a demo in London or showing a pre-recorded demo?
Well, I always do live demos, so it's kind of a principle of mine. Makes my my computer graphics classes like a little more exciting for all of us, including me, because something can always go wrong.
Yes.
So get on my toes. By the way, I just want to say as a parting shot, I was working at WebXR for years, did all kinds of cool stuff, kind of mostly went around in circles. Now that I've got this new video tool and I have to make content every week to teach 40 students, I'm making so much progress because there's actual people who really need me to actually teach them something. So having a driving application has been the great motivator, and I'm learning that firsthand. It's almost an obvious thought, but I'm living it right now. So I'm making so much progress because I can't disappoint those students.
Deadlines do make things happen. It's funny how they're called deadlines. Maybe we should call them lifelines. I don't know. Whatever. But on that note,
it's 1 o'clock.
It is in some places in the world. Yeah, look forward to next Monday. Let's just have a quick look here at our schedule. There aren't that many specifics coming up. Next is also open office. If anybody has an idea for a theme or presentation, please, do tell. Then we've got Lisa coming up. She builds things in XR, so that's going to be interesting, and so on. But thank you for today, and have a wonderful, wonderful week, everyone. And bye for now.
Bye-bye. Have a great week.
Take care.